My colleague who just spoke is new to the committee, and his comments about distractions certainly remind me of moments that we endured in 2017. We had legislation before the committee, good legislation, bipartisan legislation, to stop the Larry Nassars of the world, to not allow them to move from one job to another and harm people. And we debated that bill for like 3 hours. And you might ask, well, what was the substantive dispute? It was that the Democrats were like, you know what, Larry Nassar was a real bad guy, and we should protect Olympians. And you know who attends the Olympics? Russia. And then they spent hours and hours pursuing the Russia hoax. Now, I look forward to improving and supporting this underlying legislation, and we will have amendments to ripen some issues that I think can really help our American workforce. But we must address a searing matter before the Judiciary Committee and before the country. To label parents domestic terrorists for showing up at school board meetings and caring about their kids is abhorrent, unpatriotic, and un-American. But to lie about doing so is even worse. And somebody knew. As the Attorney General was testifying before this committee saying he couldn't imagine ever appending a label to a parent of domestic terrorism, someone was watching at the FBI and they understood that that was dishonest, that that did not paint a clear picture of what was actually happening, because there were threat labels that were being put on folks who loved their kids and who showed up. So here's my question. How many? How many Americans right now that went to a school board meeting, that emailed a parent, that confronted a principal, that reached out to their school board members, that ran into a superintendent at the supermarket and expressed their view? How many of those Americans right now are carrying a threat label with them? What's next? Can't fly on airplanes? Can't access the U.S. financial system? Get doxxed at their job? Get deplatformed online? The Department of Justice has been politicized, weaponized, and turned against our fellow Americans. But when the Attorney General came and visited us, it was an interesting moment on the calendar, because we were days away from an election in Virginia and New Jersey. And maybe the Attorney General believed that because that election was around the corner, he could downplay the aggressive, unpatriotic action that he had taken against America's parents by telling us something different. You know, when Americans lie to the Department of Justice, they get prosecuted, especially when they're conservatives. But when the Attorney General seemingly lies before our committee, the majority doesn't even have follow-up questions. And by the way, this is the same Democratic majority that indicted Steve Bannon because he wouldn't show up while attempting to resolve whether or not there was an executive privilege issue. But then when people actually show up and mislead and are dishonest, there is far less contempt displayed in the face of that dishonesty. My fellow Americans, if the Department of Justice will send the Attorney General here to lie to us, to mislead us, then they will lie to you. I was at dinner recently in Florida with my wife, and a clean-cut dude in his 30s comes up, taps me on the shoulder, and said he was a member of federal law enforcement. And I asked what entity, and he said that he wouldn't tell me, but it was the one I criticized the most. And he said, Mr. Gates, you need to understand that the same divisions that exist in our society today also exist in the FBI. And we're not all up for these terrible things that we see in our organization. And he said, tell Mr. Jordan, thank you for the great work we do, and to know that there are great patriots out there that are working hard to protect our fellow Americans. I'm glad there was a real whistleblower that stood up to tell us what was really going on, because otherwise we wouldn't know. Well, I wonder who that is.
You know, just keep talking. They're not really turning you off. Yeah. It is a little bit like a Twitter moment, though, isn't it? Mr. Chairman, I would ask that the gentleman have an additional 1 minute under the circumstances.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
The gen- the
I'll yield
gentleman-
my
the
remaining
gen-
30 seconds.
Gentlemen will suspend. We don't have a clock yet.
Oh, my.
Is that for an interference?
My time didn't run out.
And then we have the lights.
Among the unprecedented events of this Congress.
Mr. Chairman, can Mr. Gates have a redo, second act?
You had me at hello, Mr. Cohen. If we don't get the Attorney General back, maybe you can bring the chicken.
I want to remind all members that masks must be worn unless you're recognized to speak.
Does that only count if the counter's on and the lights are on?
No.
Well done.
Is this the intermittent power we've been promised in natural resources?
I understand this is a building-wide issue. The committee will stand in recess.